Hello and welcome to another video on my C# Basics tutorial series. And as always, please go ahead and follow me on GitHub, visit my website. If you have any questions, you can send me an email, no problem. So this is video number 4. So in this one, I want to talk a little bit about variables, which is like the most basic way you can store values and get values. Okay, now as always, the code for this is available on my GitHub, so let me go ahead and bring it up for you. I put the link in the description, but the code is available on my GitHub. It's all in the description. So let's get to it. So first thing is, let's talk about literal values. So let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio. There we go. And let's create a new console project. As much as possible, I'll try to avoid copy pasting, so I'll type everything, which might make the videos a little longer, but it's okay. These videos are made for beginners anyway, so I'm fine with it. Yeah, there you go. This is the folder I've been using today. Okay, .NET 8, yes sir. Okay, there it is. So all right then, so what are literal values? Literal values are, like the word suggests, actual literal values. So let's start with the basic one. So let's start with a simple character. So I'm going to say console.writeLine. I have my notes here on my second monitor, so I will be looking at my notes, okay, so that I know I'm going according to the, I've written a script. Of course, for every video I have to sit and write a script before I do it. So there you go. So I want a simple character, so I'm going to say A, right? A is a single character, so I'm going to go ahead and just say run, and then there you go. That's it, a single character, A, literal. Let's do some more literal. So let's go ahead and do a number. Okay, so again, I'll take help for the AI. I hope that's okay. And again, there's a number, literal. Let me try something, a floating number. Okay, so let me say 69.6069. After decimal, you can't say. Then I add F. In C# we add an F for a floating number. And there you go. Let's try Boolean, true or false value. Again, let me take some help from the AI. I don't actually have GitHub Copilot or anything, but I think this is like a free AI, or is that just auto completion? I don't know, where that AI is coming from. I'm sure there's a way to disable it, but I'll keep it on. It's fine. And then I want a Boolean value, so I can say true, trying to be positive, right? So there you go. Those are 4 different literals, so that should be good enough. Let me save this, run it. And there it is, A, literal value 10, the integer literal 69.69, floating number literal, and then of course Boolean value literal. So I'm literally using these values directly as they are. So now let's go ahead and move on to the next part, which is, let's go ahead and an integer, floating point, and Boolean. So I've already did that. Okay, great. So next thing what I want to do is, before we can create some variables, we want to understand some standard naming guidelines. See, when you create a variable, there are certain guidelines you want to follow. Now these are just guidelines, of course, which means like any other guideline, you can choose to not follow them, and that's perfectly okay. It's like when you enter a lift or something and you see another person coming, it's usually a good etiquette, guidelines, good etiquette. Like if you see a person coming, if the lift door is about to close, you press the door open button so the other person can get in, especially if the lift is empty or if you're alone or something. So there's plenty of space and you can save some time for that person. But that is just a good etiquette. You may choose not to do anything about it, so you can see that other person's disappointing face as they come close, but the lift door is almost closed and you decided not to open the lift door. That is really up to you. But yes, maybe not a apples and oranges example, but still, what I'm talking about. So guidelines are guidelines. So try to follow the guidelines. Okay. So the first guideline is that, you can only use, some things are strict guidelines, like you have to do it. Right. Some things are, optional and stuff like that. So yeah, but some of these are very strict. So I wouldn't call them, they are guidelines, like strict guidelines that you have to follow. Okay, so right then. So first thing is, your variable names should only be alphanumeric. Alphanumeric means, alphabets and numbers. And if you want to, you can't use a space, but you can use an underscore, like it looks like a space. So and the second thing is, it has to begin with a letter or an underscore. You can't have a variable start with number. We'll look at that in a second. Case sensitive, again, case sensitive means uppercase and lowercase does matter when it comes to variable names. And obviously you can't use any C# keywords. C# keywords are words reserved by C#. For example, int is a keyword for declaring integer variables. You can't use a variable name called int. It's not allowed. So like there's a lot of C# keywords and you can't use them. Okay, I don't feel these are very restrictive, but something to remember. But let's give it a try. Let's go ahead and try this one out. So let me go back to my Visual Studio Code. So what was the first guideline? Let me just see here. Let me just get my notes up here. Okay, there we go. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So let's follow the guidelines one by one. 1 second, let me just adjust this a little bit. Here we go. Okay, all right, good. Okay, let's follow these guidelines one by one. So first thing is I'm creating a variable. Let me use integer as an example. So I'm going to say int, and then here I want to make sure alphanumeric only. So for example, something like j is okay, no errors. I can also do something like j123 alphanumeric, again, not a problem. So that part is cool. I can use an underscore, so I can say int j underscore 123. So this is a standard way of creating a variable. Now let's look at what is not allowed with the same guideline. So if I try to do something like int 123, now that will not become a variable. You can see here there is a tiny error and it says identifier expected. So I can't just use numbers. I can't use numbers with characters either. So I can't say 123j. That would also be a problem. So that will not work. So as you can see, I can do j123, but I can't do 123j. That's another thing that you need to remember. It has to begin with an alphabet or an underscore. So I can do this. And you'll see this underscore used a lot, especially when you start building web API projects. We use underscore a lot, so you'll get used to it. So although it looks a little weird, it is fairly standard convention to use underscore in specific scenarios. So that is okay. Now let's talk about case sensitivity. So for example, let's delete this. Now, if I say int jay underscore 123, you'll see that I'm not getting any red errors, even though this and this looks similar. In C#, you can't have the same variable twice in the same scope. We'll talk about scope in a future video. But so you might think this and this sound the same. Like this is j123. This is also j123, so they must be identical. They are not, because variable names are case sensitive. So if I try to do this and change that to int j underscore 123, I immediately get a red error, and you can see the error. That's another thing I like about these editors and Visual Studio. It clearly says a local variable. That's what I told you about the scope. Local variable or function named j underscore 123 is already defined in this scope, so you can't use the same name twice. The second one is a warning, so we can just ignore that. So you'll see here there are two types of things that you'll see when you're coding and when you have problems. You have errors, which you can't ignore, you have to fix them, and warnings, which you might choose to ignore. But usually there are a lot of scenarios where you may want to just ignore a warning, like especially during development, because you create a variable and you haven't used it yet. So that's perfectly fine. But when you're about to ship, push code for production, the less warnings you have, the better, I would say, is your code. But I don't think, in my experience, you can eliminate all warnings. You can really do that if you want to. But at the end of the day, work is about balancing between cost and productivity. So that's a discussion for some other day. So anyway, so there you go. You can't case sensitivity. So I can have another variable called j123 as long as I put capital letter J. That's totally cool. But I can't have the same name twice, of course. So that's another guideline. And obviously, I can't use a keyword. Now we know int is a keyword. I can't do something like this because int is a reserved keyword. Now, once again, if you go online, just like keyboard shortcuts and all that, if you go online and say C# keywords, I'm sure you'll get a full list. Yeah, there it is. Another thing I like about Microsoft, I guess all companies, but especially Microsoft, the documentation is such good quality. It's just, It's just amazing, you know. It's really, really amazing. It's amazing such a big language has very few keywords. So much getting done with so little. Anyway, so these are all the keywords. So obviously I can't use any of these things. So there must be int somewhere here. I. There it is. So which means I can't use, let's say, something like sealed. So if I go back here and I try to create a variable called int sealed, I will get an error because it is a, you know, reserved keyword. And it says here, member modifier sealed must precede the member type and name. So it's a reserved keyword. I can't use it as a variable name. So those are the standard guidelines. Now, although these guidelines, there are a lot of guidelines, but it's not like something that you have to remember. Just apply your common sense when you are, you know, creating a variable name, and you'll be just fine. You know, why do you want to create a variable called sealed? Now, if you really want to create a variable called sealed, you can do something like this, int underscore sealed. See, or you can do something like sealed underscore. See, if you really want to use a reserved keyword, there are always alternatives. That's another good thing about programming. There is always a way out. Okay, so I don't think any of these things are restrictive or anything like that. So let's keep going here. So that's about the you know, variable names, you know, the name guidelines. They, as you can see, they're very easy to follow and stuff like that. Oh yeah, I guess I need to, I think it'll come up in a future video, but I might as well mention it. So when you're creating variables, it's good to follow. I use camel case most of the time, right? So camel case means something like this, int hello world. So that would be an example of camel case because the first word is lowercase and the rest of it is the second word, and the future word hello world or something like this. So the second word's first letter is always uppercase, so that would be camel case. But I don't always follow this. Like for example, like if I'm just creating a variable called j, I'll just go with j. It's single word, I'll just keep it short like that. Now with function names, when you get into methods, normally what we do is we do something like function. That would be wait, I think I'm getting confused this with oh sorry, we don't have to use the word function. I'm getting confused with JavaScript. So I was thinking, why is there a word called function? That's in JavaScript. Right, so in C#, you know, function names, you'll find most of the time it will be uppercase for every word. So that's not camel case, right? So for example, when we did console.writeLine in the, not before, it's right there on the top as well, see? Function names, you know, class names, they always begin with an uppercase right from the start. So camel case is usually followed for variables, but again, as I mentioned, you don't have to follow the camel case or anything. The basic guidelines, you follow them, otherwise you're free to choose. A lot of times your project manager will give you some guidelines, how they want the variables to be created, how they want the functions names to be created, how they want class names to be written, how they want interfaces to be, you know, what type of style you have to use. So these things will be given to you, but if you are the product manager, you can come up with your own guideline and distribute it with your team members. So that is about the naming guideline. So let's keep going here. Now let's look at declaring some variables. So once again, I have my notes on my second screen. Let's get back to Visual Studio. Let's do that. So let's go ahead and declare some variables. So mainly we want to look at char, int, decimal, bool, and string. So let's do another integer. So I will say int, and I'll say some number. That's how you go ahead and declare an int variable, right? And then let's go ahead and create a char. So I'm going to say char some character. I'm not initializing any values yet. We'll come back to that later. Let's go ahead and try a decimal. So I'm going to say decimal. I'll take help from AI. So some decimal. And then I want to do a bool. So I'm going to say some boolean. You can say bool if you want. Boolean is also fine. And then you want to say string, some string. That's it. That's how you go ahead and declare variables. Or if there are many different types in C#, but you know, this is a beginner video. We're just getting started. So we'll see more data types as the classes progress. But for now, there you go. That is how you go ahead and declare variables. So now let's keep going here. And now let's go ahead and initialize variables, right? Initialize these values. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go back to this line here. So a number is always a number, right? So I'm going to say 7, like James Bond. There you go. So this is a variable. You'll see the green lines because we haven't used it. So that's a warning. A green line is a warning. A red line is an error. So we can, for the time being, you can ignore the green warning errors. That is totally okay. And if you just put your cursor, it will tell you, the Visual Studio will tell you, or you can just come to the bottom and you'll see what the error warning is and error is. So that's fine. So I mean, I've gone ahead and initialized 7 to this integer variable. Let's do the same thing to the car. So car, you have to use single quote. And I'm going to say A, A for apple. Decimal, I'm going to say, decimal, I would say 55 point. I think we have to put the letter D for decimal, or is that D, or we just trying to put anything, 55.5. I always forget this part, let me just look at that here. Oh, I'm using a floating value. Right. Decimal, maybe I should just put a F. I can't do this decimal. Let me just use a float here then. So let me go to float. There you go. Yeah. So I just realized float is the recommended one for beginners. So let's use the float one. We'll worry about decimal some other time. Next, the Boolean thing. Again, I'm going to say Boolean true. Okay. And then string, it's going to be a double quote. So you can say, hello there. How are you? Okay, now if you want to see all this on the screen, very easy, just go ahead and write a bunch of console.writelines, which is what I'm going to do right now. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I'm going to say copy paste this one 5 times, and then you can type it if you want some number, so it'll come. That is IntelliSense, like when you're typing, that automatic thing. That's not AI. So AI is when you see the light gray color. That's AI trying to suggest things, but IntelliSense is this one where it tries to help you about things that will come up. So very, very useful. I love IntelliSense. It really speeds up development. So now let me go ahead and type it out. So I can do like this, some number, and then some character. There you go. I think I should change this, right? I'm using float, so let me change this to some float. Fine. Some float. This is going to be some Boolean, and this is going to be some string. You could also have copy paste it. So you can go here. Let me just delete this. You could also copy paste, up to you. So I can double click, Control C, come here. So that's also fine. So it's up to you how you want to work. Every developer over time develops their own style of doing things. You will also see my style of doing things as the classes progress. And there it is. So that's all there is to it. So now I can go ahead and rebuild. And here, let me go ahead and run this. And voila, there it is. 7A 55.5 true. Hello there. How are you? So all the variables are being initialized and then they are being used. Now we can also assign value from one variable to another variable. So let's create a bunch of new variables. So I can say int, it's some number. So I'm going to call this some number part 2. And I can give the value of the some number variable to this. So here I am assigning the value which is stored in one variable to another variable. So let's keep going. So I can say some character part 2 equals, again taking some help from AI, float some float part 2, again very nice, bool. Here, it's not taking the value for some reason from the some Boolean. This is what I'm telling you. AI is useful, but sometimes, not many times it will make mistakes. It's a fine balance as a developer, like how much of AI you want to use and how much you want to do things yourself, right? So you'll find the balance slowly. It's not like rocket science or something. It's all basic programming. We're not doing anything super fancy here. There you go. Now once again, I will do console.writeline. There you go. Console.writeline. There you go. Okay, all right then. So now if I go ahead and run it, I'll get the same output twice. I'll get the 7 again, A again, 55.55 again, true and true again. Hello there, how are you? Again, the first set is the original variable with the values I initialized, and the second set are variables which are taking the value from the existing variable. So that's another thing that you will see when you start talking about variables. So let me see if there's anything else. The last thing I have to talk about in this video is usage of var. Now this is something which I really like about C#. A lot of times I find myself using var a lot. Especially, I need to get some water. Hold on. All right then. So I use this var keyword. Var keyword allows you to create objects. We'll talk about objects in a future session. So it allows you to create variables without actually knowing about the data type in advance. Now let's talk about data type. So int is the integer data type. Char is the character data type. Float is the float data type. Bool is the Boolean data type. Now these are all data types, and of course when we go reach a point in the tutorials where we talk about classes, creating your own custom data types, creating your own types, you can say data type or you can just say types. Now when you start creating so many custom types, you may not always know in advance what a specific method is returning, what a specific function is returning. You may not always know. I mean, you can find out, of course, it's not impossible or something, but it's always about speed and productivity, isn't it? So in those scenarios, I like the var keyword a lot. So let's say I want to create a variable. Like let's assume that I'm trying to get this value, some number part 2. And for a second, let's imagine I don't know what type it is, but I want that value. So I can do var. I can say some number part 3 equals some number part 2. So I don't know. Let's imagine for a second. I do not know the data type of some number part 2. Okay, so which means I have to investigate and find out what it is. So one way of doing that is I can put a cursor and I'll find out, okay, what type it is. But it does take a few seconds to do that. Okay, now imagine doing this hundreds of times in a day when you're coding and working on a project. That's a lot of time spent just trying to find out what type things are. So in those cases, I can just use the var. And you see here, this has become an integer because this is an integer type. So the var keyword implicitly understands that this has to become an integer variable. So that is what I like about the var keyword. Very, very useful. So I can say var some number character part 3 equals some number character part 2. So I don't know. Instead of typing char, C-H-A-R, I just use var for everything. So there it is. So I can say var some float part 3. I don't have to check or worry about typing things. I can just say some float part 2. And some float part 3 will automatically become whatever type the target type is. So that's what I like about var. So you use var when, even if you know the type, it just makes it faster. Okay, so there you go. That's how you go ahead and use var. Very useful, especially when you're working with many functions and you're not sure what will get returned and things like that. Or if you're creating, especially when you start creating your own classes and objects. So we'll worry about that later in a future session, right? So there you go. That is the story with the usage of var. So that's what we have done in this video. Just some basics about variables, how to create them, how to use them, how to assign and reassign, and of course finally the usage of var. So that's all this video is. I will see you in the next one.